Today's episode is a story from history about Purandara Das, a Scrooge-like diamond merchant whose meeting with Vishnu changed him to the extent that he gave it all away and became a composer and singer, ultimately becoming the grandfather of Carnatic music. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. In this episode, we are talking about Purandara Das, who was the grandfather of Carnatic music. I had originally intended to cover both Purandara Das and Kanakadas in today's episode. But I realized that the episode would have become rather long. So this is just Purandara Das' story, and we'll cover Kanakadas in a separate later episode. Purandara Das wasn't born Purandara Das. His name at the time was Srinivas Nayak. Srinivas is one of Vishnu's many names. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Musician, Vishnu devotee, could Purandara Das really be an avatar of me, Narad? If you thought that, you wouldn't be the first one. After you've heard today's story, you can judge for yourself if Purandara Das / Srinivas Nayak was really me in disguise. Srinivas Nayak's father was a diamond merchant, which was quite a respectable and lucrative position back in the 15th century as well. That meant Srinivas Nayak's lifestyle was a cut above the rest of his schoolmates. Attending rock concerts in the VIP section was a regular weekend activity for the boy. The 15th century Indian version of a rock concert was a gathering of diamond merchants appraising the value of precious stones. Srinivas Nayak often imagined that all these rock concerts might go a lot better if they were loud music, light effects and such, to go with the crowd that was oohing and eyeing every time a new number was unveiled on stage. When the boy grew older, he got married. The close-knit society of diamond merchants had this sort of internal matchmaking app, which they called carbon dating. And so, Srinivas Nayak married Saraswati Bai. He gave her a diamond ring, 20 carats. He expected her to wear the ring and to use the carats to make a creative side dish for dinner that night. The girl was a very devoutly religious person, and that's going to be important later in the story. For now, she made no impression on Srinivas Nayak other than as a means to an end. Because all that Srinivas Nayak cared about was wealth. Don't get me wrong, Srinivas Nayak was brilliant, just like some of the diamonds he was selling. There was no doubt about it. But the way he prioritized money over everything else could be considered a deep flaw. And unlike how it happened sometimes with his diamonds, this flaw did not increase his value. His single minded pursuit of wealth might remind you of Scrooge McDuck. For clarity, though, Srinivas Nayak did not own an insanely packed money bin that he could swim in. He merely dreamt of owning such a bin. Meanwhile, he afforded himself luxuries like a diamond studded pair of shoes, which left a substantial carbon footprint. In keeping with his Scrooge McDuck characterization, when giving Saraswati Bai a gift, he was sure to demand a receipt. For tax purposes, he said. As his store campaigned, diamonds were a girl's best friend, just as tax deductions were his. When Srinivas Nayak took over complete control of the family business after his father retired, it was completely on brand for him to open a pawn shop. Diamonds are forever, he explained, which meant there was a market for second-hand diamonds, without too much of a depreciation in their value. He became richer and richer, earning the title of Navkoti Nayak. One day, Navkoti Nayak was walking home from making another million rupees. He could probably have owned, or at least hired, a luxury chariot. But no, a rupee saved is a rupee and interest earned. And besides, now that he had splurged on his diamond-studded shoes, he wanted to get maximum value out of them. On his way home, he met a new beggar. He had never seen this person before. Navkoti Nayak recognized all the beggars on the street by sight. Maybe this new beggar had only recently taken up this profession. Maybe he was a recent victim of a bankruptcy. There was something unusual about him. His face had a kind of sparkle to it. And yet, this beggar was obviously penniless. The rags he was wearing had no pockets left for him to conceal anything. Navkoti Nayak had already begun analyzing the next beggar on the street, when this new beggar tugged at his sleeve. "Sir, I need your help," he asked. The diamond merchant should have been annoyed at this very direct approach, but he was intrigued. The beggar explained that he needed money for his son's Upanayan. That word, if you haven't heard it before, means an initiation ceremony that signifies that a child is ready to leave home and begin life as a student. It's an important, life-changing event. So, it was easy to see why the beggar was stressed about it. But Navkoti Nayak had no sympathy. "So, you're just expecting a handout?" "No, sir. Go pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you have any bootstraps." The beggar was disappointed and walked away. Navkoti Nayak similarly told off a few more beggars, and therefore it took him a while to get home. But something interesting had happened meanwhile. The beggar had reached the diamond merchant's home first, and repeated his plea, this time to Saraswati Bai. Saraswati, as I mentioned, was a devoutly religious person. She believed that the beggar's son absolutely needed help, and she was ready to provide it. Even though she had no access to money, she did have her jewels. Instantly, the kind lady took off her nose ring and gave it to the beggar. The beggar went away happy. The nose ring would cover the cost of the Upanayan and feed them besides. It's obvious that Navkoti Nayak took his job of scolding beggars very seriously because he didn't get home until long after the beggar had already left. Taking off beggars is not something that Scrooge McDuck might have done. Anyway, the diamond merchant and pawn shop owner did notice that night that his wife was missing her nose ring. But he didn't ask her. He didn't care whether she chose to wear it or not. But he did care immensely the very next day. Because guess what his assistant at the pawn shop brought in to show him? It was a nose ring, identical to the one Nayak had gifted his wife. The person who had pawned it had already left with his money. The assistant explained that he brought this to Nayak because he had just noticed an inscription. It could only be seen through magnification. It clearly said, "To my dearest wife, Saraswati Bai, from Srinivas Nayak." Don't ask how jewelers managed to fit all that onto such a tiny nose ring. Let's just say that they were awfully clever. Now, a cautious, calm person might have rationalized that there could be another Srinivas Nayak who had married another Saraswati Bai and gifted her another nose ring. After all, Srinivas Nayak's shop hadn't patented the design. But Navkoti Nayak was not cautious or calm at this moment. When the assistant described the man who had brought in the nose ring, Navkoti Nayak was shocked to realize that he recognized him as the beggar from yesterday. The diamond merchant was upset and anxious. He didn't bother to wonder why the beggar was impinging on his life so many times. The beggar could have asked Saraswati Bai first, or the beggar could have taken the ring to a different pawn shop. Though the last part he could understand. Navkoti Nayak's pawn shop was the best in town. Our business is what you don't need. Guaranteed best rates. We price match. Those types of slogans quickly established it as the most popular pawn shop in town. Navkoti Nayak rushed home and confronted his wife. He demanded to know where exactly her nose ring was. At this, Saraswati Bai knew that her game was up. If there is one thing her husband hated more than giving to charity, it was his non-earning family members giving to charity. There was no way out for her now. She had already been under considerable stress since getting married. Her husband didn't care to spend any time with her or the kids. But what was absolutely the worst was that he didn't care about her deeply religious feelings. It would be quite a stretch to say that he didn't believe in God. It was more likely that he didn't think that God had any influence on his life. Now, she was confronted by a facet of his personality that she had never seen before. Murderous rage. She decided to do one last favor to her husband. She would sacrifice herself in a way that would not allow the blame to fall on Srinivas Nayak. She calmly walked out and walked back in with a glass. I asked you to bring me your nose ring, not a glass of water. But it wasn't a glass of water. Saraswati Bai was ready to exit the world, and this glass was her exit ticket. She didn't seem to hear her husband screaming about the beggar, about betraying his trust, and about the price of the nose ring. She calmly lifted the glass to her lips and drank it. Funny, she thought to herself, the poison tasted just like water. And oh, what was that? There was something in the glass. Saraswati Bai was glad she hadn't drunk it all in a hurry. She might have choked on that solid object at the bottom of the glass. I don't think she realized the irony. What was the thing anyway? She wondered. It was small and circular. And then she realized it was a ring, a nose ring, her nose ring. As she triumphantly waved the nose ring in her husband's face, she should have worried about the effect of the poison. But she didn't, because she knew what had happened here. No wonder the poison had tasted just like water. It had turned into water. Vishnu, the preserver of the universe, had decided to preserve her life. She was completely convinced of that. And shockingly, Navkoti Nayak was also completely convinced that Vishnu had intervened. A force that could change poison to water, and a force that could materialize a duplicate identical nose ring into the same cup? Now it finally made sense to him why the beggar had intersected his own life 3 times. The beggar was Vishnu himself in disguise. This was all an elaborate plan to show him the error of his ways. Scrooge McDuck didn't have much of a transformative moment, but Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol did. And that is sort of how Navkoti Nayak transformed into Purandara Das. At least in the beginning, before dramatically ramping things up. Purandara Das gave away all his money, everything that he had earned as a diamond merchant. That disrupted the local economy for a short while, but ultimately massively boosted the quality of life of everyone in town. I'm not saying the situation is the same, but if any modern day billionaires were to try following in Navkoti Nayak's footsteps, it might not be such a bad idea for the rest of the country. Purandara Das didn't stop at that. He decided that from now on, he was going to do only one thing. He was going to spread the word about Vishnu. Maybe he should have made his case to his wife before taking such a massive decision, but that would have been preaching to the choir. Saraswati Bai was thrilled that her husband had changed his tune, and she was ecstatic about the idea of devoting their lives to spreading knowledge of Vishnu. Purandara Das did get some resistance from his 4 kids. Their thoughts were out of tune, as his newly minted musical self thought about it. His oldest son pointed out that the only way for a musician to become a millionaire was if they started out as a billionaire. Taylor Swift may beg to differ, but that was a fair point in medieval India. As the joke goes, the difference between a musician and an extra large pizza is that the extra large pizza can feed a family of 6. Patiently, the diamond merchant turned singer explained to his kids that devotion to Vishnu was more important than their immediate material needs. All they had to do was sing praises of Vishnu in song form. But we don't even know how to sing, his second son protested. That was easily fixed. Purandara Das and Saraswati Bai got out their veena and tambura, which are ancient Indian instruments. And they began. Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. When you read, you begin with ABCs. And when you sing, you begin with Sa Re Ga Ma. But you listeners know the rest. Purandara Das broke all kinds of records. Not as in breaking physical records of other musicians, as some modern, vain so called artists may be doing, but breaking metaphorical records. By the time of his death in 1564, he had written around 475,000 songs and compositions. The 2nd of Jan, 1564, has a strong claim to the title of The Day the Music Died. And in counting 475,000 songs, I'm not including Purandar's version or re-released or remastered albums. But I do include all the songs from his mental vault. That number is the highest in recorded history by a huge margin. And especially remarkable if you consider that he got such a late start. No wonder he was considered the grandpa of Carnatic music. And all of his time, after he gave up all his wealth, was selflessly devoted to Vishnu. Purandara Das also developed some pretty strong views against casteism, against untouchability, and for gender equality. Those views were a lot closer to modern thinking than most of his contemporaries as well as several future generations. There's plenty of debate about where Purandara Das was born. But it doesn't really matter whether the place he was born in was in what is now Karnataka or what is now Maharashtra. Let's just say that he had an impact on a pretty big part of India. That's it for this time. In the next episode, we'll go back to the Mahabharata. It's been a while since our last Mahabharata episode. And this time, we'll finally see the introduction of one of the central characters in this great epic. I'm talking about Draupadi. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on this show. Thank you, Deep and Joy, for your comments on some of my earlier episodes. Shalu, thank you as always for your encouragement and your support. Hiranmai, Samay, Prasanna, loved your comments. Thank you all. Happy New Year to you as well. Hiranmai, Mushroom, Darsh, and all of you listeners. Samay, a folktale from Uttar Pradesh, will be coming up soonish. Dweerfur, Pikachu Master 0025, you both and a few others are getting your wish. The Mahabharata is coming up next week. Arvind Acharya, I have to see if I can continue Kalki's story without revealing too much. It's the standard time traveler's dilemma that I have to constantly grapple with. Bala, yes, Dev's and Asur origin story is lined up, and will be coming soon. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to send me an email, it's storiesfromindiapodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.